The Ben Simmons situation with the Brooklyn Nets is one of the most bizarre and strange and interesting ones in the history of the league. This is a player that was acquired as a part of a trade that sent away an all-NBA caliber player in James Harden. And Ben Simmons, last we saw him, was an NBA caliber player. Didn't have any significant injury at the time that we last saw him playing for Philadelphia. Went through this entire process of trying to force his way out, and now is such a negative asset in Brooklyn that I think they would have to trade away multiple first-round picks just to get rid of his contract. And whenever you have a player that's supposed to be the centerpiece of a trade in exchange for someone like James Harden that's an all-NBA caliber player, and that guy becomes a complete disaster, it's going to cause some huge issues for your team. Really quickly though, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Prize Picks. With all the events this weekend, now is a great time to get into Prize Picks, and I have an offer for you as well. You can click the link in the description, and you can use code SPORTING to get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Again, that link is in the description, and you can use code SPORTING. Now, if you've never used Prize Picks before, it is essentially you against the numbers. You can go online, you can go on the app, you can take a look at all the different numbers that they have for a ton of different events, all kinds of different sports, and essentially you just pick more or less for each of these numbers. You have a selection of between 2 and 5 players, and if you win some cash. So for example, game by game, if you like 3-point attempts, if you like assists, if you like turnovers, more or less on each of those numbers, as well as all the special events this weekend, you can look at some of the numbers they have over there as well. It's a really fun way to just add a little bit more to your experience, again, with all this fun stuff that's happening this weekend. Prize Picks is available in over 30 states, and once again, you can click that link in the description, and you can use code SPORTING for a 100% deposit match up to $100, and thank you again to Prize Picks for sponsoring this video. The first thing that we have to talk about here with Ben Simmons is the way that he has looked this season in comparison to his years in Philadelphia. Yes, you can go back and clown him for how he played against Atlanta in the postseason in the second round, and the fact that Philly lost basically because of Simmons passing the ball underneath the rim, all that stuff. But physically, that year and the years prior, Ben Simmons was an all-NBA caliber player, especially defensively. Offensively, he could get to the rim whenever he wanted to. The shooting issues were what they were, and Philly had a pretty good ecosystem within which he could exist with the spacing they could put around him, and a big and Joel Embiid that could play alongside Ben Simmons. But he was an unbelievable player, especially in transition. And in Brooklyn, after forcing his way out of Philadelphia, after dealing with issues there, and then having back surgery at the end of last season, Ben Simmons is arguably unplayable for Brooklyn, which is incredible because when he got there, theoretically, he was exactly what Brooklyn needed. Someone that alongside Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant could set those guys up, but didn't really need the basketball a ton. He had a lot of experience playing off the ball in Philadelphia and trying to mitigate some of those shooting issues that he does bring to the floor. He can rebound, he can guard, provides versatility. In theory, the version of Ben Simmons that we saw in the past would have been perfect alongside KD and alongside Kyrie. And of course, those guys are now gone, and you could argue that the Nets now need Ben Simmons even more, but there are already rumors going around about the fact that they're going to actively look to get rid of him in the offseason. And that to me is a very interesting situation for one of two reasons. One, his contract isn't as bad as you might think that it would be. After this season, he's got 2 years and around $80 million on his contract. It's not like he's got 5 years left or anything. And also, if the Nets were to trade him away this offseason, they would be trading him away at his absolute lowest value. His value now is even lower than it was at the time that Philly traded him away for James Harden, and his value will never get lower than this, in my opinion. So if you're Brooklyn, the decision you have to make now with this new roster, with all these wings and all these picks and all these different directions you can go in a roster that needs a player like Ben Simmons. They need what Ben Simmons used to be, a creator, a defensive presence. There's some really cool lineups you can put together now with all these wings that they have in Brooklyn with the old version of Ben Simmons. And if you think there's still something there with Simmons, it doesn't make any sense to trade him this offseason because he can still fit and he's still exactly what you need. And in theory, as he gets healthier from the back stuff and whatever issues he dealt with in Philly, as he improves from those things, his game should improve as well. The problem with that is that Ben Simmons' play this year has entered into a special and a rare kind of Westbrook-esque vibe here, where Westbrook is on a completely different level because he was at least productive statistically, but the vibes and just watching this guy play, it's atrocious. And Simmons has gotten so bad that, as I said, he's basically unplayable. Now, that is kind of specific to the Nets roster itself, because moving forward, Brooklyn has a big decision to make, in my opinion, between Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton, because Claxton cannot play alongside Simmons and Simmons cannot play alongside Claxton, and Claxton is just better. Despite the pedigree that Ben Simmons came in with, Nick Claxton is just a better player. Those two guys can't play together. They have to get rid of one of them. And if the Nets were to try and trade Ben Simmons this upcoming offseason, I think that they would have to trade at least one, maybe two first-round picks alongside him just to get rid of his contract, not to mention getting someone back that can actually help their team. And that is an unbelievable sequence of events for a player that at the time the Nets made the trade, many people went on TV and talked about how he was a perfect fit alongside the stars that they had at the time. And now that they have a group that, other than Claxton, has a ton of spacing and a ton of wings that can just create this huge, crazy defensive lineup around Simmons, now that they have that around him, he cannot figure out a way to be exactly what this team needs. And so to me, for Brooklyn, there are two paths here. One, you can hold on to Simmons, hope that he becomes something in the following season. Maybe he does, get healthier from the back surgery thing. Maybe it is something like an ACL, like an Achilles, where you need more than a year in order to come back and be productive. Maybe he'll recover from some of the stuff that he was dealing with in Philadelphia, and then you have exactly the kind of player that you would want. Or of course, you can look to move him. In either of those situations, there's pros and cons. In the first, even if he doesn't work out and he's not that great, he's a big expiring contract the following, just like what Westbrook was for the Lakers this season. And then on the other hand, maybe he does actually end up working out for you and you actually get some good value either in a trade or on your actual basketball team. But to me, the most interesting scenario here would be Brooklyn using some of those assets that they got in the KD and Kyrie trade, package that along with Simmons in exchange for who they need Simmons to be for this roster, whether it be Zach LaVine, whether it be one of these other guards that could potentially come available around the league, and go back into the business of getting a star, because desperately in the post-KD Kyrie era, the Nets need some kind of creator. They have everything else you could possibly want. They have spacing. They have guys that can guard. They have two-way players. They have a big Claxton that can be really good defensively. Thing they don't have on an all-star level, at least, is a creator, is someone that can create for all these other guys. And there can be improvements from Cam Johnson. There can be improvements from Mikal Bridges, other guys on the roster, but you still need, especially at the end of games, that focal point offensive guy who, ironically, they had a couple of those over the last couple of seasons, and those guys ultimately got traded away. But they're not that far off from creating a really interesting team here, whether Simmons figures out a way to be that guy or not. I think he's the key to all this. Whatever Brooklyn ends up becoming post KD and Kyrie, and whether or not it is a success, relies entirely, in my opinion, on the development of Ben Simmons back into what he was before, or Brooklyn getting out of that situation, just removing themselves from it completely and using that contract in addition to some of the picks they got for KD and Kyrie to add the creator that they need on this roster. Because if they can do that, there is a really good roster potentially building here in Brooklyn. And maybe Simmons does become that guy, but this situation, I honestly cannot recall this ever happening to anyone. A guy that was legitimately an all-NBA caliber player. Like I said in the beginning, you can clown Simmons if you want to, but he was unbelievable, especially defensively and in transition, despite the flaws that he had in his game. And on the floor, with the exception of not playing well against Atlanta, we never saw him completely break down physically. It's not like he tore his ACL. It's not like he tore his Achilles. It's not like he had the Gordon Hayward injury and then all of a sudden the guy's just not himself anymore. He's not any good. We never saw an injury on the floor that would necessitate how poorly and how badly he's played with Brooklyn, how bad he looks athletically. Even the passing stuff has completely fallen off at certain points. There's just no aggressiveness. There's no defensive instincts. There's nothing there. He's not playable. And to see all those things when you never even saw the guy suffer a significant injury, not to downplay what he's going through. I'm sure he's going through plenty of stuff and athletically certainly doesn't look the same, but just as a fan watching, you're used to seeing this guy gets hurt, then all of a sudden maybe he doesn't look the same or he gets older. But this transition from what we saw in Philadelphia leading up to that playoff series against Atlanta to the player that's there now and having no real tangible physical evidence in between that we saw with our own eyes that would necessitate this kind of a downturn is unprecedented, specifically in a situation in Brooklyn that does actually look promising if they can get the Simmons situation figured out. And as I said earlier, whether they can figure out this new era of Nets basketball relies entirely on what they do with Ben Simmons.